Mother-in-law grabs mic. A middle school graduate? Unacceptable. Staff panics. Bride shouts, "Then I'll stop being your daughter-in-law." Silence falls. The bride's unexpected counterattack. As soon as Ted and I entered, my mother-in-law grabbed a microphone from a staff member and said it. Irene held their breath and turned toward my mother-in-law. Only the cheerful wedding music echoed through the venue, creating an indescribably uncomfortable atmosphere. As you can see, our family is the type that can invite over 100 people to a wedding. And yet this bride is a middle school graduate? That's absolutely unacceptable. Honestly, this girl is useless. She can't even handle household chores properly, and all she does is voice her own opinions. When a ride points something out, she sulks, eats a ton of sweets, and gets fat. Honestly, an ugly duckling looks more decent than her. Alarm staff hurried to intervene, but my mother-in-law refused to listen. Watching this scene unfold before my eyes, I felt something burst inside me. Without a microphone, I shouted back at my mother-in-law, "Then, I'll stop being your daughter-in-law." Without one sentence, the room fell into silence. My name is Emily, and I'm 35 years old. After graduating from middle school, I went straight into the workforce, so my highest level of education is middle school. Some people might view being a middle school graduate as a negative thing, but I don't feel that way at all. That's because I've never really struggled because of it. The reason I became a middle school graduate was that my mother passed away right before I was supposed to enter high school. Usually, the father is the breadwinner in most families, but in our family, it was the opposite. My mother worked as an artist, and although she didn't sing herself, she collaborated with famous artists and earned a substantial income. Meanwhile, my father was working part-time jobs. My father was also an artist, but in a different way from my mother. Unlike my mother, who was wildly successful, he was the kind of artist who never got recognition. "Dad, what kind of work do you do?" I asked my father this question during a school project where we were supposed to investigate our parents' jobs. "I'm a painter. I've always wanted to be an artist since I was young." He replied with a sad smile, and I still vividly remember his face at that moment. It deepened my respect for both my parents. My mother was a busy person, often shutting herself in her home studio and not coming out for days. But no matter how busy she was, she always came out for dinner and the three of us would eat together. During dinner, she always asked me about school and showed genuine interest in my day. Despite her busy schedule, my mother showered me with deep love. My father too didn't take the situation for granted. He was grateful for the environment my mother provided, which allowed him to focus on his artistic pursuits. We had a unique family dynamic, but I loved my strong and successful mother and my loving, dream-chasing father. But tragedy struck suddenly. "Let's go to the hospital right away." One day, when I came home from school, my father, looking visibly pale, said those words. The atmosphere didn't allow me to ask what had happened, so I silently got into the taxi with my father. We arrived at a large hospital after some time, but when we entered the assigned room, my father collapsed to his knees. How? Why? So suddenly, my mother was lying there, her face covered with a white cloth. A hospital staff member gently removed the cloth, revealing my mother's pale snow-like face peacefully at rest. At that time, I could only think of her as sleeping. I couldn't understand why she was sleeping, nor why my father was crying uncontrollably. My mother had passed away suddenly from cardiac arrest. She didn't have any known illnesses, nor did her regular health checkups reveal any issues. But during work, she clutched her chest and collapsed, never to recover. It was of my third year in middle school when my mother passed away, leaving just my father and me. "Emily, life is going to be hard for you from now on." My father often said this to me. "Without your mother, we don't have the financial means to keep this house. We'll have to sell it." Our house, bought by my mother, was a single-family home, but with maintenance costs, living expenses, and property taxes, my father determined selling it was the only option. "No. I don't want to sell this house filled with so many memories. I don't care if I can't go to high school. Just please don't sell the house." Hearing my desperate plea, my father looked troubled, scratching his head, trying to think of a solution. Eventually, we decided not to sell the house. However, that decision led us down a financially tight path. Although my mother had left an inheritance, a large portion of it was taken away by taxes. My father, unable to focus on work or part-time jobs after my mother's death, became withdrawn. Seeing my father in such a state, I felt a strong urge to support him, even if it meant sacrificing my education. That's when I made the decision to start working immediately after middle school. "Emily, are you seriously not going to high school?" "Don't say that. I may not be reliable, and we don't have much money, but we can use your mother's inheritance for your education." "Oh, don't worry about the costs. Just go to high school and college if you want." "Dad, it's not about the money. I want to step into society and support you as an equal. I've made up my mind, so please don't worry." Realizing how firm my resolve was, my father stopped opposing me. That's how I, by choice, became a middle school graduate and started working. Time flew by and nearly 20 years passed since I made that decision. Now I'm happily married and enjoying a peaceful life. I met my husband, Ted, through work. We started dating in our early 30s, got engaged 2 years later, and officially married the following year. Ted is a very gentle person. To put it negatively, he can be shy and reserved, often misunderstood by others because he doesn't express his thoughts. But I understood Ted's intentions well, and we navigated our relationship successfully. Gradually, he started opening up to me and began expressing his thoughts more clearly. We've never had major arguments. While we've had minor conflicts, we've always resolved them as mature adults through rational discussions. Well, weekend morning, I woke up early, made the bed, and headed to the living room. There, I saw Ted smoking a cigarette. Ted only smokes when he's deeply troubled. What's wrong? It's rare to see you smoking lately. I asked him gently as I opened the window. Sorry, I said I quit, but I'm not telling you to stop. I just noticed you only smoke when you're worried, so I wanted to check if you're okay. As I caught the faint scent of cigarettes, Ted began speaking hesitantly. My mom's health isn't doing well. I'm an only child, and my dad's no longer around, so I have to take care of her. I might have to live with her. That means I'd be putting a lot of burden on you, Emily. That's been weighing on me, and I ended up lighting one. After finishing up the words, Ted extinguished the cigarette in the ashtray. A moment of silence passed, with only the sound of the autumn breeze echoing between us. I had anticipated this, so I wasn't entirely shocked. Ted being an only child and his father already passing away were things I had known, but hearing it directly made me a little anxious. Still, I knew that if I showed any reluctance, it would only burden Ted further. Ted, I married you knowing everything, including this possibility. You can rely on me when you need to. Everything will work out fine. Thank you, Emily. Wrapped in Ted's faint scent and the lingering smell of cigarettes, I gently embraced him from behind. At that moment, I had no idea what kind of challenges awaited us in the near future. 3 months after Ted told me about his mother, things progressed quickly, and she moved in with us. The house she had been living in was a rental, so she canceled the lease and relocated to our home. Emily, please take care of my mom from now on. Tess said this with a deep bow before heading off to work one morning. Oh, you don't need to make such a formal request. I'll be fine. Go to work before you're late. Watching him leave, turning back multiple times with a worried expression, I returned to the living room. Immediately, Molly started giving orders in an overbearing tone. Ugh, this place is filthy. Can't you clean up right after using something? Her gaze fell on the sink, where a few breakfast dishes water piled up. I'll clean it up shortly, don't worry, I replied politely, trying not to provoke her, but she responded with a scowl. That's not the point. You should clean things immediately after using them. It's basic manners. Instead of wasting time looking at TA, focus on doing your chores. I hate being in a messy space. She glared at me in silence, applying subtle pressure to act faster. I'm terribly sorry for the mess. I hid my frustration behind those words. Honestly, if she had so many complaints, she could clean up herself. This was my and Ted's house, and we had our own way of doing things. I was tidy by nature and couldn't relax in a messy space, so I always spent 2 hours cleaning after Ted left for work. Yet Molly disrupted that routine with her remarks, and it irritated me to no end. Still, I managed to remain calm in the face of her constant jabs. However, she didn't notice my composure and continued her barrage of insults. You know, I noticed you didn't bring any gifts when you moved in here. It's common courtesy for someone being looked after to bring a present. And this house is not very bright, is it? Laundry probably won't dry properly here. We dry our laundry indoors or use the dryer, so it's not a problem. And this living room feels cramped, doesn't it? The fridge is small too. Why don't you just move to a bigger house? Her demands were outrageous, especially since she had just moved in uninvited. She also began mocking my education. I heard from Ted that you're a middle school graduate. That's the lowest level of education. How disgraceful. Sure, you passed the equivalency exam, but that's just a test. Pretending to be a high school graduate when you didn't even attend school? How laughable. That was the last straw. I finally snapped and decided to speak up. If you have so many complaints about the chores, why don't you just do them all yourself? Of course, Ted and I won't contribute a single cent for your expenses. And if you want to move to a new house with new furniture and appliances, you can pay for it yourself. Molly let out a high-pitched scream. How dare you, a mere daughter-in-law, speak to me like that? You're completely untrained. I've heard about your poor upbringing. Your father must have spoiled you just because you're a girl. Oh, I hate men who are soft on their daughters. Her words spoken without ever meeting my father filled me with disgust. My father, currently hospitalized, hadn't been part of the family's introductions. So she didn't know him. Yet she insulted him without hesitation, further deepening my resentment. Unfazed, she continued spewing cruel remarks. Middle school graduates are useless. I can't believe you're living your life as if it's normal. With your lack of intelligence, it's only natural for you to serve the family, and yet you can't even handle chores properly and dare to talk back? It's the worst. Why does someone like you become my son's wife? After she vented all her frustrations, Molly stormed out of the house. That evening, I told Ted about the events of the day. Here's what happened today. I'm still managing, but I thought it was important to let you know right away. Ted listened intently, his face growing pale as he started trembling. No way. My mom did something that horrible to you? I had no idea she was capable of this. I'll make her leave immediately. Ted stood up, ready to confront his mother, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head. If we throw her out now, we'll only end up being labeled as the bad ones. People might gossip, saying we were too harsh for simply pointing out a few things. Let's observe for a bit longer and see how things develop. After hearing my suggestion, Ted nodded reluctantly. If you say so, we'll hold it off for now. But if it ever gets too much for you, tell me right away. I'll always take your side, Emily. If it comes down to choosing between you and my mom, I'll pick you without hesitation. Those words alone were enough to satisfy me. Thank you, Dad. I hope we can slowly build mutual understanding with your mom over time. There will likely be hard times ahead and moments when I feel like giving up. But when that happens, just hold me like you always do, and I'll manage to keep going. Tears welled up in Tut's eyes as he wrapped his strong arms around me. However, things didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. 6 months had passed since Molly moved in, and things had only gotten worse. I had gained a significant amount of weight due to stress-induced overeating. My face had rounded, and many of my clothes no longer fit. While Ted coped with stress by occasionally smoking, I, being a non-smoker, turned to sweets to release my frustration. Each time Molly made snoring remarks, I would overeat, leading to more weight gain. You look like I was sealed now. At this rate, you won't even fit into your wedding dress. I didn't want to engage in conversation with her, so I quickly made coffee and retreated to my room. The wedding she referred to was the one for me and Ted. We had already had a quiet ceremony, but Molly insisted on hosting a large wedding now. When are you two going to have a proper wedding? I need to fulfill my role as the mother of the groom. Without a wedding, I can't do that. It's unfair. Hugh should book a venue immediately and hold a wedding. Initially, Ted and I both declined politely. We already had a private ceremony that we were satisfied with. Hosting a big wedding now would cost too much, and we'd rather save that money. That's right, Mom. Unless you're offering to pay for it, there's no reason for us to do this just for your satisfaction. Despite our reasoning, Molly was adamant and refused to budge. I thought it would be fine to let her handle it, but I underestimated her determination. One evening, while having dinner with Ted, we received a call from the wedding planner. Your mother-in-law has already visited our venue and made a reservation. She even arranged for microphones and decorations. We were both stunned, staring at each other in disbelief. The planner explained that she had scheduled everything without consulting us. What is she thinking? Ted clenched his fists in frustration. Unable to cancel, we reluctantly went along with her plans. My stress peaked, and my overeating worsened, further fueling her insults. Even after all your dieting, your face is still round. You may have squeezed into your dress, but you're fooling no one. You're clearly overweight. Despite her relentless remarks, the wedding day arrived. I managed to lose some weight, but my face remained visibly fuller than before. As we entered the grand hall with over 50 guests, I felt an ominous tension in the air. Molly grabbed the microphone the moment Ted and I walked in. A middle school graduate is a disgrace to a family. As soon as those words left her mouth, everyone froze and turned to face her. The cheerful wedding music continued to play, clashing horribly with the tension in the room. The atmosphere was unbearably awkward. Look at us. We're family that can't invite over 100 guests to a wedding. And yet this bride, a middle school graduate, is absolutely unacceptable. She's useless. She can't even manage household chores, always prioritizes her own opinions, and sulks whenever I correct her. She gorges on sweets, gets fat, and looks worse than an ugly duckling. The staff tried to intervene, but she ignored them completely. Watching her disgrace me in front of so many people, I felt something snap inside. Without a microphone, I raised my voice to respond. Then I'll stop being your daughter-in-law. The room went completely silent as soon as I said it. The staff quickly stopped the music and an eerie stillness settled over the venue. Molly had pushed for this wedding solely to humiliate me in front of everyone. Her actions were so childish that I couldn't help but laugh. Impressive, Mother. I didn't expect you to go this far, but since there are so many witnesses here, it's the perfect moment to make this announcement. I'm truly quitting as your daughter-in-law. I'm divorcing Ted. Ted, standing beside me, looked pale and shaken. I caught his eyes and gave him a subtle nod, signaling my decision. He hesitated briefly, but nodded back. Confirming his response, I stepped toward Molly. Seeing me confront her, she blinked repeatedly, unable to hide her surprise. You seemed unusually enthusiastic about this wedding, and now I see why. Your sole intention was to shame me in front of everyone, and to top it off, you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowing under my name to fund this charade. Molly's face turned pale, and she tried to argue. What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. You're so delusional, just like any middle school graduate. But no one sided with her. The guests began murmuring among themselves, shaking their heads in disapproval. Molly, realizing her situation, became visibly flustered. It's not normal, is it, for Molly to ridicule her daughter-in-law over her education at a wedding? The guests, both from my side and Ted's, nodded in agreement. Some even started glaring at her, whispering that her behavior was unacceptable. Molly, stunned by the lack of support from her own guests, began stammering. She had assumed that everyone would side with her and was now at a loss. Mother, just because you think this way doesn't mean everyone else does. At a wedding, ridiculing the bride over her education is beyond comprehension. The crowd's whispers grew louder, with some openly criticizing her. I gestured to the staff, asking them to bring me an envelope I had prepared. Within minutes, a staff member hurried over, slightly out of breath, carrying the envelope. I opened it in front of everyone, holding up his contents for all to see. It was a document showing a loan taken out in my name for hundreds of thousands of dollars. I never took out this loan. But when I called the loan company, they confirmed that Molly had impersonated me to borrow this money. That's fraud. Molly's face turned to ashen as she began trembling. How could you do this to me? You, a middle school graduate, dare to humiliate me like this? Before I could respond, Ted stepped forward, his voice low and firm. That's enough, Mother. Shut up. Everyone turned to look at him as he continued. You've already done enough damage. You humiliated my wife, hurt her deeply, and now we find out you committed fraud against her. This wedding is over. All gifts will be returned, and this will become a simple dinner party. As for the loan, you'll repay it in full. Emily isn't responsible for a single cent. Grabbing my hand, Ted led me out of the venue, leaving behind a stunned and silent crowd. The next day, another shocking development occurred. Emily, I saw you on the news this morning. Are you really an artist? She held a ticket in her hand, her face pale. Yes, I am, but I didn't feel the need to tell you, Mother. I smiled faintly before continuing. My late mother was also an artist. After her passing, I decided to carry on her legacy. That's why I chose to enter society early. Not because we were poor and not because I was incapable, but because I wanted to honor her memory and support my father. You, who insulted me without knowing anything, have no right to judge my choices. Molly's hands trembled as she gripped the ticket tightly. The ticket she held was for the revival concert of a legendary band. The original founder of this band was none other than my late mother. The revival had been announced recently, with me taking up my mother's name to carry out her work. News outlets had covered the story, and it was creating a buzz in the industry. Molly, a fan of the band and an admirer of my mother's work, seemed utterly shaken. She has spent months belittling me, only to find out I was the daughter of the artist she revered. Mom, I've always known about Emily's background. She worked tirelessly to prove herself, never relying on her mother's legacy until she was ready. She's overcome so many challenges, and I deeply respect her as both my wife and as a person. And yet, you've insulted her repeatedly. I can't forgive you for that. Hearing her son's harsh words, Molly looked devastated. No, this can't be true. How could I have insulted someone so incredible? Ted and I exchanged glances before delivering the final blow. As I said at the wedding, I am no longer your daughter-in-law. Ted and I will be filing for divorce. Afterward, we'll remarry and move into a new home under Emily's family name. Mom, I'm grateful you gave birth to me, but I can't condone your behavior. From now on, you're on your own. Molly began sobbing uncontrollably, pleading with us to reconsider, but it was too late. If you ever try to interfere with our lives, I won't hesitate to involve the authorities. Overwhelmed, Molly could only cry and apologize repeatedly. Afterward, Ted and I found a new place to live, a cozy home that suited us perfectly. The distance from Molly provided peace, and our lives gradually became more stable. She continued to repay the fraudulent loan in small amounts, avoiding legal trouble, but her reputation had been ruined. I later heard, she attended the revival concert seated near the back where our eyes met briefly. I see you made it to the concert. My mother wrote this band's final song, and I completed it in her honor.